On a cold January afternoon in 1919, Boston's North End was suddenly struck by one of the strangest and deadliest disasters in American history. A massive steel tank holding over 2 million gallons of molasses burst without warning, releasing a 25-foot-high wave of thick syrup that tore through the streets at nearly 35 miles per hour. It flattened buildings, crushed people and animals, and caused the deaths of 21 people while injuring over 150 more. Though it may sound like a bizarre headline today, this was a very real tragedy that devastated an entire neighborhood and left the city stunned. Molasses may seem harmless, something you drizzle on pancakes, but back then, it was a valuable commodity, especially for making rum and industrial alcohol. The tank that exploded had been a key part of that supply chain. But when it failed, it turned an ordinary winter day into chaos. The flood quickly made national headlines, and what initially sounded like an odd mishap became a major wake-up call. This wasn't just a freak accident. It was the result of negligence, bad engineering, and a lack of oversight. It became a defining moment in the conversation about industrial safety and corporate responsibility in America. The tank that burst open belonged to United States Industrial Alcohol, a company that had rushed to build the structure during World War I to meet the soaring demand for alcohol used in explosives and other war-related industries. Completed in 1915, the tank was enormous and held millions of gallons of molasses shipped in from the Caribbean. But from the start, the tank was flawed. It leaked so much that locals brought buckets to collect the dripping syrup, and workers heard strange sounds, creaking, groaning, even popping noises. Rather than fixing these clear warning signs, the company covered up the leaks by painting the tank brown to hide the stains. In the days before the disaster, Boston experienced a sudden temperature swing from freezing cold to unseasonably warm, which likely caused the molasses to expand quickly inside the tank, increasing internal pressure. Some scientists also believe the molasses may have started fermenting inside the tank, releasing carbon dioxide and creating even more gas pressure. The tank's steel was too thin, poorly riveted, and never properly tested. It had been built quickly, cheaply, and without expert approval. All of these factors combined turned the tank into a ticking time bomb. When it finally gave out, the result was sudden, violent, and catastrophic. When the tank ruptured, it wasn't a slow leak. It was a violent eruption. A thunderous roar echoed through the streets as the side of the tank blew out, releasing more than 2 million gallons of molasses in a massive, fast-moving wave. Eyewitnesses said it sounded like a train coming off the rails or an explosion underground. The wave of syrup surged through the tightly packed streets of Boston's North End, lifting buildings off their foundations, crushing wooden structures, tossing vehicles, and even knocking a freight train off the elevated railway. Though molasses is thick and slow when poured from a bottle, under this kind of pressure, it moved with incredible force. It hit everything in its path. People were swept off their feet, pinned under wreckage, or suffocated in the sticky flood. Horses drowned, wagons were smashed, and debris was pushed hundreds of feet away. Some victims were thrown into the air by the sheer impact of the wave. Rescuers rushed to the scene, but the molasses made it nearly impossible to move quickly. Firefighters waded through waist-deep syrup trying to save survivors and recover the dead. Every step was a struggle in the thick, heavy mess. The destruction happened in seconds, but the horror lasted for days. After the floodwaters of molasses settled, Boston faced another enormous challenge: cleaning up the mess. The syrup had soaked into every corner of the neighborhood, covering streets, sidewalks, alleyways, and the insides of homes, shops, and factories. It filled basements, clung to walls, and hardened as the temperature dropped again. Firefighters and volunteers worked around the clock, using high-pressure hoses and salt water pumped in from the harbor to try to wash it away. They spread sawdust and sand to absorb it, and shoveled thick globs off the ground by hand. But the cleanup was slow, grueling, and sticky. The molasses stuck to everything: boots, uniforms, tools, and even skin. Trains and trolleys carried it into other parts of the city. Children tracked it into schools. Police said their patrol wagons and station floors were coated with the stuff. Even months after the flood, the North End still reeked of molasses, and residents claimed that, on hot summer days, the scent would rise from the ground as if the disaster had just happened. The harbor itself turned brown for weeks. The cleanup effort cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and left behind a lasting impression. Not just because of the scale of the disaster, but because of how completely it transformed a neighborhood. As the city recovered, attention turned to who was responsible, and the company behind the tank quickly pointed fingers elsewhere. United States Industrial Alcohol claimed that anarchists had sabotaged the tank by planting a bomb, a theory fueled by the political tensions of the time. But no credible evidence of sabotage was ever found. Survivors and the families of the victims filed lawsuits against the company, and the result was one of the first major class-action lawsuits in American legal history. Over the course of 5 years, the trial revealed how poorly designed and constructed the tank had been. Engineering experts testified that the steel walls were too thin, the rivets were weak, and the tank had never been properly tested before it was filled. Internal documents showed the company ignored repeated warnings and complaints. The court ruled that United States Industrial Alcohol was legally responsible for the disaster. They were ordered to pay $628,000 in damages, roughly $10 million in today's money. The case set new legal precedents for corporate accountability and helped shape building codes and safety inspection standards across the country. It proved that even powerful companies could be held liable for cutting corners, and it marked a shift toward greater protection for workers, residents, and city infrastructure. Though it happened more than a century ago, the Great Molasses Flood continues to be studied and remembered, not just for its bizarre nature, but for the lessons it left behind. Today, engineers and scientists still examine the event to better understand the behavior of fluids under extreme conditions. Molasses is what's called a non-Newtonian fluid, meaning it doesn't flow like water, and in large quantities, it can behave in unpredictable and dangerous ways. But beyond the physics, the disaster left a lasting legacy in public safety and urban planning. The flood led to changes in construction regulations, required safety inspections, and improved oversight of industrial projects. It also strengthened the legal systems that allow people to stand up to corporations that act recklessly. In Boston's North End today, a memorial marker placed near the location marks the spot where the tank once stood, but most people walking by don't realize that this quiet corner was once the scene of chaos. The molasses flood reminds us that disasters don't always look like explosions or fires. Sometimes they come in unexpected forms. And sometimes it takes a sticky, surreal tragedy to bring about real change in how we build, manage, and protect our cities. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more history content, and see you in the next one.